Good morning and welcome everyone. I'm Dan Rundy. I'm a Senior Vice President here at CSIS. Thank you all for joining us for our conference on doing business in Ukraine, building Ukraine's security through a modernized economy. I'll give a more formal welcome to the conference in a little bit after this session, but for now I want to quickly thank our guests, Congressman Panetta and Elzy. Thank you, members of Congress. I know you're extremely busy people who are on time, so we need to be really respectful of that. My great friend and colleague Elizabeth Hoffman, the Director of Congressional Government Affairs and a fellow here at CSIS, will introduce our esteemed speakers and moderate the discussion. So thank you all so much for kicking off our conference members of Congress. Thanks. Over to you, Elizabeth.
Thanks so much, Dan, and thank you for hosting. Thank you to you and your team for hosting this really important conference. I'm going to start by introducing our two distinguished guests, and then we're going to have a bit of a conversation about the state of play of Ukraine in Congress right now. So to my left, we have Congressman Jake Elzy, who serves the 6th Congressional District of Texas. He is a member of the House Appropriations Committee, which is the one that writes all the checks, so quite important. He's a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy and has served the U.S. for over 20 years as a helicopter pilot before joining Congress. To my right, I have Congressman Jimmy Panetta, who serves California's 19th Congressional District. He's on the Committee on Ways and Means, Armed Services, and Budget Committees. He also served in the U.S. military as an intelligence officer in the Navy Reserve before joining Congress. So we're really privileged to have these two gentlemen with us today who have really been leaders in their respective caucuses on Ukraine. So I'm going to start with a question, and I'll ask you both to kind of offer your thoughts on this. It's been 3 years since Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, nearly 3 years. Since then, war has broken out in the Middle East, and we're seeing increasingly aggressive actions by the CCP in the Pacific. Could you both offer your reflections on why it is important to continue to prioritize support for Ukraine's fight against Russian aggression in the context of everything that's going on in the world? Maybe Congressman Elzy, if we can start with you.
Because it's 1938 again. And if you don't pay attention to your history, you're going to trundle right into doing the same thing again. I firmly believe that we could have avoided 1917 and 1941 had we just been involved beforehand. I believe that history does repeat itself if you're not careful. And none of these conflicts that we're talking about specifically by 4 different countries, 4 different dictators in charge of industrialized nations are working in cooperation in their various spheres of influence and conflict to do exactly what happened in 1938, and it's a binary decision. They either invite war, but we either invite war by being weak, or we invite peace by being strong. There's no two ways about it. This is kindergarten politics right here, and the bully will come for your milk money, and you have 2 choices. You either punch him in the face and he never bothers you again, or you give it to him and he takes it forever. So for me, Ukraine is the Sudetenland.
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth, and thanks to CSIS, and of course thanks to my colleague, but more importantly my good friend Jake Elzy for being up here and allowing us this opportunity. And I also want to thank CSIS for the opportunity to visit Ukraine, which we had an excellent time to not just go in on an overnight trip, which unfortunately congressional trips, that's all they allow, and that's all the State Department allows, and that you take a 10-hour train ride in, you then have 8 hours of meetings, and then you take a 10-hour train ride out, which really does a disservice to members of Congress who want to learn about the issue and gather evidence about the issue to then make their point at home. CSIS allowed us to get on the ground for 5-6 days, I want to say, go to Odessa, drive up to Kiev, and then get out and about, and really have develop the sentiment from the people, from military leaders, from civilians, to understand what they're going through. Rather than just having the high-level discussions, we got on the ground and had low-level discussions. And I can tell you one of my takeaways to your question was not only when we were there were the military leaders and the government leaders thanking us for the F-16s. The civilians that we were talking to were thanking us for the F-16s. And they may not fully know the capabilities of the F-16s and what else is needed for the training of the pilots of the F-16s, but it was such a morale booster for them. And so for me, this conflict is important in that it's not only demonstrates, as Jake said, an international level of support that's needed, but supporting the will of democracies, what we felt there in Ukraine amongst the people, understanding that they are fighting for their lives, but more importantly, and they felt this, they're fighting for the future of democracy, not just in Ukraine, but how it can be in other fledgling democracies, and that when they have an unjust and unprovoked invasion like this, they need all the help in the world to ensure that this doesn't happen, not just to them, but to other democracies as well. I've also been able to visit Taiwan twice during this past year, and I can tell you that will of the people, what we experienced in Ukraine, is something I believe that other countries have to learn from, have to see, and have to experience in order for them to succeed. So everything that the United States can do to support not just the will to fight, but that will to succeed is something that I believe other countries are learning from as well.
Thank you. So it is election season, so I want to mention polling, which has shown increasingly divided opinions among Americans about sustained support to Ukraine. You both have the opportunity to travel, not just in your respective districts in Texas and California, but across the country and interact with Americans of all backgrounds. And so I was hoping you could help give us a sense of kind of what are you hearing from average Americans about Ukraine? What aren't they understanding maybe about the history or the current context? What are they understanding? Do they really see this as critical as you all have laid out?
I mean, look, we live in a Snapchat society. Okay, we get that. It's the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And so when it comes to this type of support for these types of wars of attrition, it doesn't just take support, it takes sustained support. And obviously people have to understand, how these types of wars affect us, because that is kind of how we are in America, unfortunately, and that we just look at what's in front of us and unfortunately don't see down the road. To Jake's point, we're not looking back at history and learning from those lessons in order to look forward, in order to which direction we go forward. And I believe it's our responsibility as members of Congress to not just learn about it, gather the evidence, but to explain it and why it's so important, especially for this type of support, in which Congress has voted on $174 billion, with a B, billion, in supplemental support for Ukraine. And so, even no matter where the public is, if it's the right thing to do, it's our responsibility to explain it. In my district, I'm from the Central Coast of California, the 19th Congressional District, which is literally along the coast of the central part of California. I'm experiencing a tremendous amount of support for Ukraine and our efforts to support Ukraine. Don't get me wrong. I have a blue district, and therefore I have people to the left of me who are basically, the support is starting to wane a little bit. One of the reasons why I traveled to Ukraine twice within the last month and a half was to gather that evidence, to develop my argument, to let them know that I've been on the ground, I've spoken to the people, not just leaders but civilians, and to let them know what they're going through and how important it is to support them. And I believe that that's how it is in the United States Congress, to be frank. I say that despite what you see on TV. I say that based on the actual votes that have taken place. If you look at our last supplemental vote, despite the 6 months that it took to get to that vote, it passed overwhelmingly in a bipartisan nature. I think it was 311 yeses to 112 noes for a $64 billion package. So I think that demonstrates that despite what you see on TV, despite what some of our candidates are or are not saying, you have to look at the actual result, and the result in Congress was overwhelmingly bipartisan support for Ukraine.
Jimmy's right. This is a soundbite society. So you have to be consistent in your messaging for support for Ukraine. Put it in a historical context that I alluded to earlier. When we talk about whether, and I don't refer to this as a war. I refer to this as a genocide. Because technically, legally, that's exactly what this is, and it harkens back to the Holodomor of the 30s with Stalin, who Putin tries to emulate, the kidnapping of children from the Ukrainian parents for re-education. That is the definition of genocide. If you want to disregard that somehow, which you can't, but if you were, and then you want to talk about empire and colonialism, when you talk about the lithium fields, the gas fields, the ability to feed 8 million people around the world that
Nice.
Ukraine has, this is much, much bigger than just a war. Because Putin has said Ukraine doesn't have the right to exist. There are echoes of that in the Middle East too. So when we talk about this, you're saying that a country doesn't have a right to exist. You're trying to erase Ukraine from the face of the earth. That is absolutely unconscionable on that basis alone. So what we're doing is good work, and the $175 billion we have spent as a combat veteran, as a friend who has lost friends in a man who's lost friends in combat, lost them to suicide later. I'm the last guy who wants to put boots on the ground in Ukraine. The Ukrainians are fighting instead of us and defending freedom. And as I've said many times, we are the world's leader of a democracy. But Israel and Ukraine are a close second, in my opinion, because they're standing up and fighting for all of us.
That's good.
And I want to ask you both about your travels to Ukraine. I mean, you both are very strong supporters and have been since the beginning, but was there anything specific on the ground that changed or shaped your argument, how you thought about the situation that you hadn't experienced before actually being in the country?
I can give a short answer. Bucha. I've been to Bucha. I've seen the atrocities committed by the Russian troops, by Vladimir Putin. This is an evil man. He's not crazy, but he's dang sure evil. You don't, as someone, Jimmy and I both have servant's heart. We both signed up to serve our military. We didn't just sign up to defend our country. We want to serve freedom-loving people around the world. That spirit has not left this country. And once you see the atrocities that aren't reported anymore, people get tired. In this Instagram society, they quickly forget, and they go on to the next conflict and the next conflict, and they want to forget. You can't forget what you've seen, what Russians have done to the Ukrainians. And so for me, that was the most impactful part of my trip, and meeting the families of those who were killed. That was very impactful for me.
To Jake's point, what he talked about when he said about Putin, I think is spot on, in that we had the opportunity to visit a bombed power plant. And it demonstrates the targeting that's going on, not just military targets, but civilian infrastructure, to yes, go after the electricity, but to go after the morale of the Ukrainians who are suffering through 18-hour blackout days, especially coming up here in the winter. That is going to wear on them. And so what you saw in basically, obviously, not just seeing the damage to civilian targets, but like I said, to the infrastructure and what they're thinking through and going after, not just to take out the energy, but to wear on the morale of the Ukrainians, really impressed on me that we have to continue to be there to support them through these tough times when they're not just getting bombed and getting missiled and drone attacks, but like I said, they're suffering through days without power and electricity, and Ukraine in the winter without electricity will be tough.
So you both mentioned the $174 billion in support that the U.S. has appropriated to date. To emphasize, not all of that has actually gone overseas to Ukraine. Much of it has stayed here to revitalize our own defense industrial base. But, with the election till the end of the year, I think passing an additional aid package, the possibility remains open, although it seems unlikely. However, there are many things that can be done short of passing another assistance package, and all of the aid has not yet been expended as well. So I want to get your perspective on something that President Zelensky has really been pushing lately, and that's the ability to use U.S. and Western weapons to strike deeper into Russia. And also, are there additional authorities or additional equipment, more advanced equipment that the U.S. could transfer that is short of writing another check at this point, but that could really help the Ukrainians gain the momentum on the battlefield?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is something that I heard about repeatedly just 2 weekends ago when we were at the Yalta European Strategy Conference. What else can the U.S. be doing, obviously? As a Congress member, I have to say, I was reminding them that we did our part, and we ensured that the funding was there through our power of the purse in order for this administration to then deliver that support. Another thing is not just on the supplemental, but it was on the Presidential Drawdown Authority. Now, annually, just to kind of quickly digress, I won't take too long on this. Annually with the PDA, it's $100 million. However, we bumped it up in last year's budget to $6.4 billion. However, if the administration does not spend that by October 1st, it reverts back to $100 million. So they lose out on that. Unfortunately, with the continuing resolution that we're going to be voting on today, it does not extend that PDA, which is an issue that was brought up in a classified briefing that we had yesterday in the Armed Services. And so for now, we're making sure that there are other ways in which that PDA can be spent. In addition to the supplemental, in addition to the PDA, there's the foreign military financing where we can provide funding to other countries to then buy our armaments, and then the European Defense Initiative is another way in which we can support Ukraine purchasing armaments. When it comes to permissions, the two things that we heard about in our travels and that I heard about 2 weekends ago was air defenses, permissions. And when it comes to permissions, I think you have to look at sort of not just where and basically the distances of how long we can go in, but what exactly are they targeting? I believe that there should be long-range permissions allowed when it comes to missiles into Russia, because I don't believe that you should allow Russia sanctuary within their borders, especially in areas from which they either launch attacks or enable attacks. International law says that's okay. Common sense says that's okay to attack those areas. And so I think we should be doing that. However, the question that you have to have is, what are you targeting, in the sense that, yes, we want to target military infrastructure, but you do have to watch civilian infrastructure. Obviously, the worry from the United States is, are you going to provoke them to then, take one step further to use nuclear arms? I believe that there's been too many red lines that we've passed that have weakened those red lines. And so it demonstrates to us that we can't allow these permissions. We should allow these permissions for Ukraine to engage in that capacity.
I would agree with Jimmy, and I'd add, without mentioning names, that I think our national security team has been operating from a position of weakness when we actually operate from a position of strength. The Ukrainians are not the aggressors here, so I have a question for people, and I ask this rhetorically in many cases. Is there a will to win, or just a will to not lose? Because I went to the Munich Security Conference a year and a half ago, and I watched a bunch of Europeans pat themselves on the back that Ukraine hadn't been lost. Well, Ukraine was doing the fighting. There's nobody else there. So you patted yourself on the back for what? A little bit of aid at the very beginning? Do we want to win? Do we have the will to win on the freedom-loving, liberty-loving Western world to win a war again? Because here's the deal. China's ruthless. Iran is ruthless. Russia is ruthless, and so is North Korea. Can you win a war by being nice in return? We didn't win World War II that way. It's unfortunate. Freedom-loving people don't understand the logic that goes behind a colonial venture, a genocidal venture like what's going on in Ukraine or in Israel, or the attacks, or any of the things that are going on in the world right now. We didn't win World War II by being nice. If your enemy is ruthless, the only thing he understands is that Russians are the Russians are the Russians are the Russians. This war started in 2014. Is Crimea a part of Ukraine? Yes. Internationally recognized. And it should always be so. Because if we give it up, then we are repeating those errors that we talked about in 1938 to a much wider conflagration down the road. And I'm not willing to admit that this is inevitable. Let's let them win, and in order to do so, they have to have deep strike capability to win. And the ATACMs that I was calling for a long, long time ago, the national security team did not allow. And they should be allowed to attack whatever bases, and they're going after military targets. The Russians aren't. The Russians are being ruthless. They're going after civilians. They're going after apartments. They're going after infrastructure. We're not even allowing the Ukrainians to use our weapons to go after military bases. This war will end if we allow them to do that. I'm not willing to sacrifice further lives by saying, well, we don't want provocation, we don't want escalation. We have to operate from a position of strength and say, you can't do this anymore. We are willing to let them win, and we want them to.
That's good. It's funny, look, as an attorney, although as a prosecutor and a veteran, I heard this the other day to your point, Jake, we have too many attorneys in the room making decisions when it comes to Ukraine's national security. Mm-hmm. And you need more veterans.
You need more veterans.
Yeah.
You're both.
If I could add one point to this, when we talk about Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan, and South Korea, Ukraine is 9 times smaller than, or Russia is 9 times bigger than Ukraine. In all these conflicts, we're talking about big bullies. What does victory look like for Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan, and South Korea? Existence. Existence. That's all they're asking for. What does victory look like for their aggressors? Domination and destruction of the countries we're talking about. We can't on the basis of just wanting to be reelected say be nice and say, well, we just, they'll make a deal. They won't. They don't think like us. So all we're asking for is survival of these nations that are internationally recognized. And it's 1938. It's time to stand up and be strong again.
Good.
So the war in Ukraine is the first real glimpse we have seen into the present character of warfare in the 21st century. The Ukrainians have proven that they're able to innovate and deploy solutions to the front lines very quickly, which has given them the edge and been incredibly important in this conflict. What lessons do you think the U.S. should be learning from Ukraine? What are we learning? What aren't we learning?
I had the fortunate opportunity to visit not just a team of focused on the aerial drones out in Kharkiv, but more around the Kiev area. We visited an area in which they're working on the sea drones. Mm-hmm. And to see a $200,000 drone to basically be able to take out a $1 billion fleet there in the Black Sea is something that I think we really have to kind of has changed the attitude, not just of the United States, but of other countries, and watching how these drones are taking out these major battleships is something that I think is a lesson that many people are going to learn. Because like I said, I mean, what we've seen with these sea drones be able to take about, I think, close to 24 of the Russian fleet out and basically kind of push them back away from the Ukrainian coastline is really a win in itself. And so the ability of Ukraine to innovate and use this sort of slimmed down technology in order to take out, like I said, massive hardware is something that I think everybody can learn from.
Absolutely.
Well, I think it just further illustrates how our acquisition process is bogged down. It might surprise you to know we won World War II without a Pentagon. We won World War II with Liberty ships that they cranked out by the bushel to transport troops overseas. We're working on that in the United States now. We have DIU and other small companies that are giving the primes a run for their money. The primes have a role, and so do the newer and smaller and more agile companies that we're working on constantly in transforming how we do things. But I would say that the acquisitions process, the requirements process has gotten so big and bulky that we end up building something way late. And do you think our adversaries know this? Yes. Do the Chinese know that we're $35 trillion in debt? Yes. Do they know that we're behind timeline on our shipbuilding? Yes. Do they know we ran aground with a tanker yesterday? Yes, they do. They're watching all this stuff, and we have to show that, okay, the time for bureaucracy has ended, red tape has ended. When your survival is at stake, as it is in Ukraine, there isn't any red tape. build as much as you can, as fast as you can. We need to get more lean on that process here.
Yeah, Jake's spot on. I mean, our industrial base has a lot of catching up to do. I was fortunate enough to go, when I went to the Reagan Defense Forum last year, we peeled off and we visited an attack drone industry there, just right in Los Angeles, California. And to see that basically American workers are benefiting from materials that we're sending overseas to Ukraine is something that I think more people need to realize, how that war is benefiting the United States.
Yeah.
And that supplemental funding that we're agreeing to is, that money's not just going into Ukraine. It's going here in the United States and staying here in the United States.
Great point.
Absolutely. So final question, because I know you all have to run and keep the government open, which we do not want to hold you up from doing.
We're patting ourselves on the back for paying the rent these days.
Small victories. So there's going to be a change in administration in a couple of months here, whether it's a Harris administration or a Trump administration. What would you respectively recommend that a new administration focus on when it comes to Ukraine? What is the priority, January when they step into office?
I think we need to send a message that we are, unfortunately, being forced into being the arsenal of democracy again. Europe has handcuffed themselves to energy needs that they can't sustain from an adversary at best and an enemy at worst. We have the ability to unleash our energy and unleash our industrial base to be the arsenal of democracy again in order to prevent a repeat of what happened 80 years ago. Life tends to happen in 80-year cycles, and we're right on the precipice of that. So whoever the administration is, it needs to be a stronger message. I think there does need to be a change in the national security team that says, if you provoke, we will respond with overwhelming force. You punch us in the face, we're going to hit you twice. And that message needs to go out, because that's the only thing that these aggressors understand is force. It's unfortunate. It's inconvenient. It disrupts our daily lives. Prices go up. But the reality is that it could be much, much worse. And we have to be ready to and tell them, we're not giving any land away, not 1 inch. Not 1 inch. And get back Crimea, reestablish those borders. We will accept nothing less. If they understand that, then they will respond in kind.
Yeah. Look, despite some of the criticisms that I may have for how this administration has made some of the decisions when it comes to Ukraine, I believe they've actually done an excellent job when it comes to international leadership on this issue and ensuring that we are right there leading the way when it comes to support for Ukraine, when it comes to making sure that basically we continue to have support for Israel, when it comes to making sure we continue to have support for Taiwan as well. I think this administration has made it clear, despite some of the lengthiness of how they got to those decisions, they've still done that. I think the next administration has to be firm, and when the leader of the free world is asked whether or not they're going to support a fledgling democracy, the answer needs to be a resounding yes, and that it needs to be a pure sound. As Jake was saying, they need to understand that we will support them all the way to victory.
Well, thank you both for your leadership in Congress on this issue, for your moral clarity. I think it should be a comfort to all Americans to know that we have political leaders like both of you on either side of the aisle. So thank you for being with us here today to kick off this.
Can I add one more thing?
Yes, please.
We're friends. He's a Democrat, I'm a Republican. We disagree on some things. The 311 vote, pay attention to that. Don't pay attention to what you see on TV.
Exactly.
Politics and the actual functioning of government is boring, so you'll never see it on TV. You can be loud or you can be effective, but you can't be both at the same time. He's effective. I try to be. The United States of America is still strong. Our best days are ahead of us, and we will support Ukraine with overwhelming bipartisan support until they win.
I can't top that. So let's end introducing our guests.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Congressman. Wow. How do you top that? My goodness, that was great. Okay, welcome again, everyone, to Doing Business in Ukraine, Building Ukraine's Security Through a Modernized Economy, I want to thank especially those who've traveled a long way, many people from Ukraine, a few from Moldova. My job is to say thank you and to deal with some housekeeping issues. So first, thank you, okay? I'm particularly grateful to a number of partners who've helped bring together a number of important folks here. The European Business Association, RASM We Stand, the American Chamber of Commerce in Ukraine, the National Association of Manufacturers, the U.S.-Ukraine Business Council, the Governance and Local Accountability Hoverla activity of DAI, supported by USAID, and the Ukraine-Moldova America Enterprise Fund for being strategic partners to CSIS. I want to especially thank our financial sponsors. I want to first start with my really good friends at Deloitte. Deloitte, you're the wind beneath our wings. Thank you, Deloitte. Thank you, thank you. I want to thank my friends at Invenergy, my friends at USAID, our friends at Kingspan, and Alitro. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So I also need to thank my colleagues who've worked super duper hard on this conference. So I want to thank Romina Bandura, Austin Hardman, Madeline McLean. I've had a daily call with them for more than 6 months. I think they're tired of me speaking once a day to them about this, but we've worked really hard, but they've worked extremely hard, so I want to thank them in particular. I'm really grateful. This conference could not have happened without the other CSIS staff. If you need anything during the conference, staff can be identified by their dark blue name tags and lanyards. In June of 2022, CSIS convened the Bipartisan and International Ukraine Economic Reconstruction Commission with the aim of producing a policy framework that would help attract private sector investments for Ukraine's future reconstruction and transformation. To support the commission, we did a whole bunch of work to get smart about Ukraine. We produced a major report. We had a major conference here in 2023. We did 25 different policy products, policy papers across CSIS. We held 30 seminars and public events in over an 18-month period. It's a lot of work for a think tank just on Ukraine. Through this work, CSIS has established itself as a leader in the Ukraine's reconstruction here in Washington and a place for problem solving and practical thinking about the economic future of Ukraine. I also want to reference the fact that CSIS, through my colleague Elizabeth Hoffman, helped organize and lead the first staff delegation since the war of more than 8 hours. And we did 3 or 4 days on the ground of members of, and then we've done 2 congressional delegations, and she led the first congressional delegation since the war in April, and she just came back in August, and these were 2 members of Congress who'd been with her in August. So we're, as an extension of all that work, we're hosting this conference for a second year to dig deeper into the immediate and long-term barriers to investment in Ukraine and identify practical solutions. My deepest thought after all of this work is that we need to align the reconstruction of Ukraine and its reform agenda with the EU accession. So what I tell American audiences, what would you do to join the coolest fraternity or the coolest sorority in college? What hazing would you put up with? There's not enough, in my mind, foreign aid, there's not enough white papers, there's not enough emotional speeches to change the trajectory of the country of Ukraine. What's going to change the trajectory of Ukraine is joining the coolest club in the world. Now, in Washington, people are like, what the hell, the EU? Don't people want to leave it? It's extremely desirable. It changes the trajectory. We should align all the reforms, and all the foreign aid should be pushing towards that. That's the goal. So, okay, I've got a couple of administrative things I need to reference. Here's my first ask. If you have one of those headsets, for goodness sake, please, please, please return it. We have to pay money. If you happen to walk off with it, I will be really unhappy. So it's great that we have these headsets, but you got to return it. Do we have an agreement that you're going to return it? I don't want to hear about you put it in your bag or you put it in your raincoat. I'll be really unhappy. So please, for goodness sake, would you please return it after the conference, okay? Sorry, but I think I need to be really clear about this, okay? Regarding safety, I'm going to serve as your responsible safety officer sponsor at this event. Please follow my instructions should the need arise. Take a moment to familiarize yourself with our emergency exit pathways for this room. All panels will be on this floor of the building. The room will be split into 2 rooms during the parallel breakout sessions. There are signs outside each room to inform you where each panel is taking place. We're thrilled that this is a great networking opportunity. We want people to talk to each other. We specifically didn't have this live stream so you all could talk to each other. We have 12 mayors here, representatives from 12 cities in Ukraine. We want you to meet them, and they want to meet you. But you got to keep the noise down when the sessions are taking place. So we have space available if you'd like to hold a bilateral meeting. Please ask CSIS staff and we'll get you a space to have a meeting. And you can talk to folks by down there on the first floor about that. The space available on a first come, first served basis. Later this afternoon, the CSIS Ukrainian Mayor's delegation will be seated in the room behind the reception desk on the first floor. This is intended for an opportunity to speak directly to local officials on the ground in Ukraine and strive to get some more practical outcomes. We're not interested in doing theoretical stuff. We want to do practical stuff. So that's why we would like you to please spend time with them. Lunch will be served outside on the second floor or in the room behind the reception desk. Please don't eat in the lobby area downstairs or I'm going to get into trouble. Again, the conference is not live streamed. We did this on purpose because we wanted you all to come here. Okay, so then we will then post the recorded sessions afterwards and upload them on the CSIS YouTube channel next week. So finally, let me return to the program. Ambassador McKee, Assistant Minister Aaron McKee serves in the Bureau for Europe and Eurasia at USAID. As we look at the different facets of Ukraine's economic transformation, it becomes evident that this cannot happen without USAID. And I'm so pleased to know that Ambassador McKee occupies such an important role at AID. She's my friend and my colleague. I'm really happy to introduce my friend, Ambassador McKee. Ambassador McKee, come on up. Please welcome my friend, Aaron McKee. You're the best. Thank you.
Good morning. Let me start off obviously with gratitude and thanking Dan Rundy and his team for organizing an excellent conference once again, for the continued thought leadership and he and his team are providing on how we sustain our support to Ukraine. And this is important not only so Ukraine wins the war, but more importantly, that they win the future. Let me also extend my appreciation to Representatives Panetta and Elzy, who just spoke a little bit earlier. The support that Congress has provided to Ukraine on behalf of the American people has been extraordinary, historic, and crucially, deeply bipartisan. We at USAID never take for granted the trust that Congress has placed in us, in our agency, to effectively deliver our economic and humanitarian assistance to Ukraine, or anywhere else in the world, in the service of our own national security. I would also like to recognize the Ukrainian mayors who are here and express how honored I was to meet with you yesterday. These local leaders will continue to be at the heart of driving Ukraine's recovery and driving that recovery to an even brighter future. We are proud to be partnering with them and admire your resilience, your clarity, and your ability to really drill down on what matters the most, and that's the people who live in your communities, in your municipalities, in your regions. Finally, let me just salute the many friends of Ukraine who are here in the room with us today and say once again how deeply we value your partnership and absolutely know that the power of partnership, as Dan mentioned earlier, foreign aid isn't going to do it alone. The resilience and persistence of the Ukrainian people is not going to be able to achieve that brighter future we're all fighting for. but it's together, collectively, we are stronger together, and the power of partnership and action is something I have been honored and privileged to be part of for the last 2.5 years. Ladies and gentlemen, 1 year ago, I had the honor of addressing the first convening of this conference. On that occasion, I spoke about USAID's strategy to consolidate, catalyze, and connect opportunities for transformational change in the region. I described how our Ukrainian partners, through bravery, resilience, and innovative spirit, had created space for something new and different, a unique moment to disrupt and dismantle the authoritarian playbook. I also spoke about the importance of the private sector and Ukraine's success, and to the opportunities represented by Ukraine that are and remain open for business. 1 year later, despite all of the tragedy and senseless destruction waged by Putin's war of aggression, we have seen remarkable progress towards building a foundation for Ukraine's recovery, and it's driven by a straightforward question: what will it take for Ukraine to win? I think the agenda that Dan and his team have established for this conference have done an excellent job in highlighting some of the elements of the answer to this fundamental question. So I'd like to use it as a framework for my own reflections. Let me start with the mayors, who you will hear from next. If the discussion is anything like my conversation with them yesterday, then you are in for an enlightened and impassioned exchange. It's not about policy, as Dan said. It's not about theory. It's about practical action and measures that we can take now to be able to lay that foundation for the future. At USAID, we certainly recognize that Ukraine's economic future will be driven in large part by local actors, including mayors and municipal leaders. Donors have largely recognized this reality, and it was a central theme of the Ukraine Recovery Conference that took place back in June. At that conference, USAID was proud to host the Coalition for Sustainable Municipalities. The coalition brings together like-minded groups of government, implementers, civil society, associations of cities and regions, and partnership networks that are all united by their commitment to enhance access to finance and partnerships for these municipalities, as well as facilitating municipal human capacity development. USAID has a long track record of supporting decentralization efforts in Ukraine by integrating these key actors, local government, civil society, and the private sector, to stimulate the economy, but also anchor that stimulation in a bright vision for the future. To facilitate greater efficiency of the delivery of public service, USAID is also helping build the capacity of the Ukrainian government employees and civil society leaders on topics such as strategic planning, complex recovery programs, procurement, and communication. Since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion, these training programs have provided assistance to more than 180 communities in 19 oblasts, helping local government better meet the needs of their communities and better respond to the demand signal of their people. We continue to believe that despite the pressures of wartime pulling decision-making towards the center, decentralization is a critical factor and focus for the path forward for Ukraine to unlock its full economic potential. Undergirding this reality is, as Dan's program has rightly included, the question of Ukraine's energy needs. With winter approaching, energy is at the top of our minds. Everyone in this room is well aware of Russia's deliberate targeting of civilian energy infrastructure and basically Putin's weaponization of winter. But as we saw starting last spring, winter has nothing to do with it. He wants to cut off that lifeline for the Ukrainian people. By endangering the supply of electricity and heat, Putin seeks to hobble Ukraine's economy and industry and to sap the will of its brave people. who continue, despite these relentless assaults, to defend themselves against this aggression. So with the support of Congress, since the full-scale invasion 2.5 years ago, USAID has invested about $1.5 billion US dollars in Ukraine's energy and heating sectors. We're helping Ukraine respond to immediate needs by procuring equipment and materials for emergency repairs, for protection, and delivering real capacity. Beyond our extensive direct assistance to Ukraine's energy sector, let me also flag for you a new initiative that my team recently launched. Like so many of you here today, we recognize this rapidly approaching winter is an all-hands-on-deck moment. And through our new initiative called Light the Way, we aim to catalyze new partnerships to meet Ukraine's needs this winter. Our appeal is simple. This moment, just as the early months of Russia's full-scale invasion, marks a time for businesses, philanthropists, faith-based communities, and others to surge support to ensure that the Ukrainian people continue to have the wherewithal to endure and ultimately defeat Russia's aggression. USAID and other global donors are increasing our relief efforts, but more help is needed to meet the urgency and, unfortunately, the growing energy needs. There are two specific funding mechanisms that will accept donations and rapidly mobilize those resources ahead of winter. The first is the Ukraine Energy Support Fund, which was established to counteract the effects of Putin's attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure. It is managed by the Energy Community Secretariat, an international organization that is fostering an integrated European energy market. And this is really important because everything that we do, even in response to the emergency and urgency of the moment, is laying the foundation for that ultimate integration with the EU, from connectivity for the market, through access and channels, through modernization and decentralization, not only of the local government, but actually of the antiquated energy system that Putin finds it so easy to dismantle. USAID has contributed $25 million to this fund, and it has dispersed already $500 million in response to these attacks. The second opportunity is the UN-managed Ukraine Humanitarian Fund, and this fund, to which USAID has provided about $67 million since 2022, is currently facing a funding gap of about $150 million. But this effort is already paying dividends. Earlier this week, on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, Bank of America announced their support for Light the Way through a contribution of $250,000 to the Ukraine Humanitarian Fund, and they will match up to $750,000 in contributions from their corporate peers for a total of $1 million as seed capital. I want to thank the Bank of America for their generosity and appeal to those in the room to follow their deeply meaningful gesture with their own support. Let me now turn to another sector of Ukraine's economy that is of deep relevance to the conversation today. The audience knows well that agriculture remains a key driver of Ukraine's economy, representing over 60% of the economy's commodity export revenue, 10% of Ukraine's GDP, and 17% of employment. Last year at this conference, I described the Agricultural Resilience Initiative, or our Agri-Ukraine initiative, which provides seeds, fertilizer, and capital investments to thousands of Ukrainian farmers. I'm proud to say that not only have we doubled down on our assistance in this area, dedicating $350 million of USAID funding, but we've leveraged more capital than we had even hoped to, from the private sector, from financial institutions, and other donors. Currently, those contributions are in excess of $510 million. As a result of our support in this area, nearly 1/3 of the country's registered farmers receive seeds, fertilizers, crop protection, storage, and financing to help with their harvests, not just one season, but to continually produce, because we know that the role of agriculture is not only vital for Ukraine's economy, but for Ukraine's contribution to food security around the world. I want to stress to this audience in particular that this would not have been possible without our private sector partners, including Bayer, Corteva, Kernel, Grain Alliance, Nibulon, and Go and Seed. Bayer, for example, invested more than $60 million in a seed processing facility in Ukraine, and in doing so created new jobs, increased production of high-quality seeds for more than 25,000 farmers. Gowan Seed Company donated $1.5 million worth of vegetable seeds in May to Ukrainian farmers, helping 200,000 Ukrainian farmers feed their communities. Agri is one of our biggest success stories of the war, but we can do even more. There are more investments to be made, including potentially by some in this room. In Ukraine's agriculture sector, it includes opportunities to move the entire sector up the value chain, critical as Ukraine advances on its path to EU accession. One more sector that I'd like to talk about that is critical to Ukraine's future is the technology and startup sector. This has demonstrated astounding creativity and resilience and has grown more than 7% since the war. The tech sector is key to Ukraine's current and future economic dynamism, and USAID is proud to be part of its remarkable growth. USAID recently supported 20 new startups to attend the Select USA Investment Summit, which connects thousands of investors, companies, economic development organizations, and industry experts. And we continue to forge these connections with Ukrainian companies and accelerators that can provide the mentorship that they need to enter EU and, more importantly, US markets. With our help, they can acquire the tools necessary to achieve their ambitions and, frankly, exceed them, as we've seen year after year with the tremendous growth in this innovation market. For the investors in the audience, it's clear that Ukraine's startup sector is not arriving, it has already arrived. There are incredible opportunities now to invest in future regional and global companies offering innovative products and services. Ladies and gentlemen, let me hit a few final highlights for your program today. I'm delighted that my deputy, Mark Simikovsky, will join you later for the discussion of the role in Moldova in Ukraine's reconstruction. Mark and I were in Moldova just last week, and as he will tell you, Moldova has the potential to make a critical contribution to Ukraine's future, as well as to benefit from a renewed economic dynamism in the region. The fate of these two countries in particular is closely linked, not just because they share a border, not just because of the generosity of the Moldovan people when so many refugees fled at the outset of the reinvasion, but because they see their future entwined with the future of Ukraine, and that's a democratic, prosperous, stable future. When I asked Moldova, what more do you need from us? From the president to the prime minister to the people on the ground, and they said, please continue to help Ukraine. I also want to underscore the session that you're going to see today that is dedicated to strengthening Ukraine's workforce and human capital. We know about the capacity gaps and the impact not only of the war, but of the evolving sectors and dynamism that we need to address in the country. Over the next 10 years, Ukraine will need more than 4.5 million new skilled workers. And we see USAID as having three primary strengths we can leverage to support this workforce development and upskilling needs. Our first is our existing small and medium enterprise programming, which allows us to tap into existing industries and markets and address workforce problems from the demand side. Our second strength is technology. USAID's groundbreaking partnership with Ukraine's Ministry of Digital Transformation is helping export DIA, the state in a smartphone, which I'm still hoping someday we will get here in America. I just spent 4 hours at the DMV renewing my license, and it was horrible. This ecosystem that they've developed, this amazing innovation which helps ease service delivery for Ukrainian citizens, is now being exported to other countries. Similarly, we can leverage Ukraine's best-in-class digital services together with the U.S. technology sector to bring workforce solutions at scale. In July, my team in Kyiv announced the Reskill Ukraine initiative, a partnership with the Ministry of Economy, Coursera, which is an American company, and Happy Monday, a Ukrainian company. This initiative leverages online training programs to reach Ukrainians in traditional training programs might not. We expect to reach about 30,000 participants and connect them with over 2,000 potential employers, with the aim of creating at least 8,000 jobs. This is really important to underscore, because the last thing you want to do is reskill, upskill, or provide new capabilities and have nowhere to apply them. And so we are working hand in glove with the private sector and the Ministry of Economy to identify those critical gaps so that we not only help build the capability and capacity needed to fill those gaps, but that those folks can be put to work right away. This leads me to our third strength, which is our emphasis on private sector engagement in all sectors of our programming. We coordinate closely with private sector partners to ensure worker training is purposeful, demand-driven, and appropriate. Energy, ICT, and agriculture that I mentioned are three critical sectors, and of course, there are many, many more. But in the interest of time, let me just leave you with a few key thoughts. USAID recognizes that investors will continue to look for a predictable, reformed business environment in Ukraine. Ukraine's progress on reform, particularly anti-corruption and the rule of law, has been remarkable. And as we are all aware, much more remains to be done. We will continue to prioritize reforms aimed at creating a more open, transparent environment for businesses, anchored in the rule of law, and one that inspires investor confidence, and frankly, citizen confidence. We are prioritizing governance reforms of key revenue-generating institutions like the State Customs Service, State Tax Service, and the Bureau of Economic Security to contribute to that increased public trust and transparency. Ukraine will also need to advance a new wave of judicial reform. We will not only support Ukraine through our own funding and programming, but we already and intend to continue to catalyze impact through partnerships and innovation. I'm deeply proud of the Memorandum of Understanding we brokered this year between NASDAQ and Ukraine, which has resulted in a waiving of listing fees for Ukrainian businesses on the U.S. Stock Exchange. We also facilitated an agreement this year for the Bank of America to loan senior capital markets experts to advise Ukraine's Ministry of Economy on identifying and promoting projects to potential investors and international financial institutions. This relationship is paying dividends, literally, already. It is this kind of collaboration and ingenuity that will drive Ukraine forward to the economic future we want to see. And I would ask those in the room today to consider how you can leverage your organizational strength for high-impact, concrete results. What I have seen throughout the horrific war is a clarity of purpose and a deepening resolve from our Ukrainian partners, not only to win this war, but to accelerate the work required to create the very future they are fighting for. One in which Ukraine is independent, democratic, prosperous, and fully integrated into Euro-Atlantic institutions. every day that entrepreneurs are open for business, that farmers find ways to sow their fields, where independent media provide quality, fact-based reporting, and civil society groups advance democratic, inclusive values, and where government officials pursue those reforms critical for Ukraine's long-term goal of EU accession, the people of Ukraine demonstrate they won't be defeated by Putin's war. USAID will continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with our Ukrainian partners, just as we have since the start of the full-scale invasion and for decades before. Ukraine needs all of us in this room, particularly those from the private sector, to bring our resources, our dynamism, and expertise to bear. But this isn't just about what Ukraine needs, or that it is squarely in our national interests, or even what is morally just and proper. I am constantly reminded by my Ukrainian friends that this is about the tremendous economic opportunity for those willing to pursue it. So join us as we continue to recognize the bright future that Ukraine has. Together we can achieve the vision that the Ukrainians themselves have for their own future: a prosperous, sovereign, democratic, Euro-Atlantic integrated Ukraine, an ally, a partner, an inspiration to us all, and the best possible rejoinder to Putin's barbarism and to authoritarianism around the world. Thank you. Slava Ukraini.